Welcome to Barnyard Language, honest talk about running farms and raising families. We are Caite and Arlene, an Iowa sheep farmer and an Ontario dairy farmer, with 6 kids, 2 husbands, and a whole lot of chaos between us.
While this is a podcast for farm families, sometimes our content isn't for the whole family. So kick off your boots, reheat your coffee, and join us for some Barnyard Language.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Barnyard Language, fall edition. The leaves are flying where I am. Caite, how are things in your neighborhood?
We're under a wind advisory starting in 10 minutes, but it sounds like it's already picking up substantially out here.
Windy.
Windy. Yeah. So far less dramatic than yesterday. Yesterday I was in the middle of a bunch of computer-based stuff and then the power went out. And sometimes this happens when it's windy, but they've rerun our lines and it's been a lot better the last few years. And then I got a message from my in-laws that somebody had smucked a power pole with their combine.
Ooh, not great.
But thankfully the REC was already on it and it wasn't our combine. So really the best of all worlds.
The talk of the neighborhood, but doesn't directly affect you too much.
Yeah. Now, I mean, it could be much worse. It could have been our combine. Or it could have been, a field fire or something. So really, not too bad. We put the rams in with the ewes on Sunday, so we should have baby sheeps in 5 months. For the first time, well, this year we bought 2 new rams and put marking harnesses on both of them. We split the ewes in half and gave each ram.
And as I remember it, one was your choice and one was your husband's, right?
Yeah. Mine is named Moon Pie, after my daughter tried to name him Oreo in the grand tradition of small children and anything that is black and white. So I named him Moon Pie. Jim named his Leroy. And as of last night, Moon Pie was ahead by a few ewes. They're certainly more enthusiastic than our older rams, since these guys are both yearlings and we're very excited to meet these new ladies. The new ladies were not quite as excited to meet them, but I'm sure they will work it out. Other than that, harvest is going. We combine some corn and pick the rest for feed. So we were doing that. And yes, I'm looking out the window. I can't see anything. Looks like it's raining.
Maybe no corn coming off at the moment.
No corn coming out at the moment. We are 1 calf away from being done with fall calving, but that cow was AI'd for reasons since we had a bull.
At least you have a confirmed breeding date.
Yeah. And knock on wood, all the cows and the calves are quite healthy and happy and running around and wrestling and doing cow stuff.
Being adorable.
Yep. How are things at your place, Arlene?
Well, no corn coming off yet. Well, I mean, we did silage a while ago, but the rest of the corn will be coming off soon, I would imagine. I think looks like a lot of rain this week, so maybe we'll have to hold off for a little bit, but I believe the combine is at least in the neighborhood, so that is promising. I started or restarted something this week that I think Caite is going to find delightful. I have been an observer, but not a participant of a particular sport for a few years. I used to be a competitive curler, and I signed up to curl again this year. So I had my first night of curling on Friday of last week, and I wasn't as sore the next day as I thought I might be. So that's the thing. I did not fall, which is also a good thing. And it was really fun. And the thing that is so cool about curling is that it's one of those sports that you can do basically for your whole life. Because the night I was out there was an open ice time, and there were some kids who were, probably 8, 9, 10 years old, just learning to play for the first time. And there were also some seniors, I don't want to guess their ages, but I'm going to say in the 70s probably, who were also out on the same ice and also being able to enjoy the same sport. So that is pretty cool that people of all ages can enjoy it. So I was playing with some teenagers and some adults and some older people, and it was a lot of fun. So I have signed up to start playing potentially twice a week. Both leagues that I signed up for are drop-in, so if I don't happen to make it that week, I don't have to find someone to replace me, so that is kind of nice. But I'm excited about getting back out on the ice and, stretching my body and mind in a different way than I have been for a while. And part of my motivation for getting back started again is my parents were both big curlers, and, when my dad passed away this past year, it was pretty cool to see all the people that he had met through that sport over the years and become friends with, and so it's about the sport, but I think it's also, just about making more connections in my community and meeting more people because sometimes on the farm, it can get isolating a little bit. We have our community, but it's also okay to meet people who aren't farmers.
It's nice too. I was thinking a lot about this with the knitting group that I go to. That it's cool to have those community spaces where, especially where it's cross generational like that. Our fiber group routinely attracts people who are in their early to mid 20s up to mid to late 80s, and we all have different careers and different family types and all sorts of things, and it's fun to have a community thing where there's no stakes or real. I mean, obviously the world of curling is highly competitive, much more so than knitting, but it's not like
Not where I am, so don't worry.
yeah, not like a job thing, where you're professionally networking and
And that people of different ages can be of similar or diverse skill sets and can help each other. I was playing with a girl who I asked what school she went to, and she's still in elementary school, and she was much better than me, and she's sort of like max she's 13. So it's pretty, and same with fiber arts, right? You could have a 25-year-old who has some amazing skills that might teach an 85-year-old something, but you could also have, you know, someone who's older being able to teach a teenager, how to get started. So yeah, it is cool to have those types of activities that age isn't really a barrier to participation.
I have the feeling too that curling is probably physically like Tai Chi or like a lot of things like that, where it is probably a lot harder physically and mentally than it looks like it would be. And it's probably one of those things where you're like, oh, this is nothing. And then you get home later and you're like, why am I sore?
Unless you do a lot of lunges in your everyday life, yeah, the sliding part is challenging, and keeping balance on ice, definitely, is more of a core exercise than you realize is at the time. Just using your whole body to keep yourself balanced and moving is definitely a challenge.
I feel like being able to stand back up from a lunge on ice is also substantially more challenging than we would normally anticipate.
Yes, yeah, especially when one foot is covered in a slidey surface, which makes you move faster. Another thing we did this weekend was, so I found out about this local place. So it's a orchard. They have like do orchardy stuff, play structure and, well, apples, obviously, petting zoo, that kind of stuff. They have an Airbnb, and then they also on this app called Swimly or Swimply, I can't remember, one or the other. This is not an ad, but anyway, they have a swimming pool that they rent out on this app, so you can rent it like by the hour, and they heat it into the fall. So, just, yesterday, we're recording on Tuesday, on Monday, our kids had a day off school, and I booked the pool for an hour, and it was, like, not quite hot tub temperature, but close to it, right? The steam was rising off of it, so it was a cool, rainy day, which wasn't ideal in terms of keeping our clothes and towels and stuff dry while we were in the pool, but it was so fun just to be able to rent the pool for an hour, and it was like $35, and I mean, I can't do anything with my kids for less than $50, so my sister and a couple of my nephews came and joined us, and we went swimming, so that was a fun little feature. I don't think they're gonna heat it too much longer. I imagine it would get pretty expensive to heat, through the winter or anything, but that was a fun little activity that now I know is a possibility, maybe even in the spring again when it starts to get warm, but not quite warm enough for other people to keep their pools open.
I feel like often too the novelty of something like that is worth so much, even more so than the actual activity sometimes, just of having something different, you know, it's worth a lot.
Yeah, and better than, in some ways that, public swim at a public pool is fine, but sometimes it's just like okay, what are we all, why are we all here and why aren't we doing this together? It felt more fun to just be just us as a family.
Yeah, for sure.
So not a lot of farm news. We do have a lot of cows due in the next little while, and I looked in the calf barn this morning where my father-in-law was feeding, and we have 20 stalls and they're all full. So I think some of those little beef boys are going to have to move their way out because we've got a bunch coming in the next week. So night check is just more of an adventure every evening.
You could bunk bed, little calf bunk beds would be real cute. I mean, maybe not for the one on the downhill side, but
Anyway, why don't we go ahead and introduce our guest for this week?
all right. Well, Christine, why don't we just start back with what your elevator pitch is to sort of clarify what you mean when you say regenerative farming?
So when I speak of regenerative agriculture, I refer to those practices that are actually allowing nature to function as she was designed. So we're concentrating on the four fundamental ecosystem functions, and they're not separate. It's just the different windows that we look at through into the ecosystem function, and that is the water cycle, the mineral cycle, the biological community, which the different species of plants and critters that we see in nature, and then finally the energy flow, capturing that solar energy, which is what supports all of living organisms on this earth. And the reason why these regenerative practices are so important is because the Industrial Revolution did a fabulous job of giving us a lot of mechanization and not requiring so much labor on the land. But many of the practices that we've been using have been very extractive. They've been extracting from this ecosystem function, so much so that soil health is so much poorer than what our great grandparents worked with. So we have degenerated the ecosystem capacity to produce with these extractive processes. And so these regenerative practices will increase that overall ecosystem capacity so that we can then be sustainable. It is my personal opinion that we can't be sustainable until first we regenerate the soil, the ecosystem capacity, and have effective mineral water cycles and have a lot of diversity in species and in critters on the land, and then make sure that the soil is covered at all time. I like to say when I'm having ranch tours and teaching, coaching, Mother Nature is very prudish, and so she does not like to be naked, and she will do everything she can to protect herself that way and cover herself. Weeds are her first line of defense. If we keep that soil covered, those weeds won't be necessary. Although weeds are working for us, weeds are actually helping us do some of the mineralization that we've created dysfunction on, as well as covering the soil.
So, Christine, I find that fascinating because, and I'm going to move this question up a little, I guess. I'm fascinated by the process of things that are being taken up by sort of early adopters, those in the rural Midwest, kind of those weirdo hippie types who come up with crazy stuff. Um, and I'm wondering what changes you've seen become more standard. I'm in my mid 40s. I grew up in central Iowa, which is real flat, and it's corn and soybeans. And even when I was a kid, so 35 years ago, fall tillage was normal. You deep ripped everything, you left it black over the winter, you planted into it in the spring. And the idea of doing that now to most people in our area is pretty horrifying. The people may still do spring tillage, but the idea of leaving it ripped up like that over the winter is just, for a fair number of folks, it would be kind of like walking into the gas station naked. It's kind of that same vibe. Um, and then, when I got into college, maybe people were starting to talk about cover crops, but it was kind of a fringe thing. And now, you drive down the highway and you see people with signs out about their cover cropping, or you can just see that they're cover cropping. So I'm wondering what changes you're seeing become more standard, and what you think, sort of what's the next thing that will be normal?
That's a good question. And Katie, thank you for sharing that the Iowa farmers are so more advanced. I can share that here in Texas, that is not the case. Cover cropping is still a concept that many of these farmers have not integrated. Even now, they're harvesting the corn. Well, not quite yet. They'll be doing it soon, but so many fields get left bare over the winter time, and it's just a shame. And you can see the capping going on, right? And then, I hear them all the time. They're complaining about the rain that they're not getting, but the reality is that the rain that they do get, they're not capturing, right? That infiltration rate isn't there because that ground is bare. We get most of our rain in the wintertime, so that rain is not in the soil, and then they complain that they've got to do all these um, practices to help support soil health, right? The fertilization, the pesticides, the herbicides. So, but with respect to your question, um, most of my experience has been with ranchers. I've only been able to facilitate workshops a handful of times with actual crop farmers. So most of my experience is with ranching, and and again, most of my context is Texas and some Oklahoma, some New Mexico. New Mexico is much more brittle, and most of these ranchers are still doing very set stock grazing, very conventional grazing, or they may be doing rotational grazing, but all they're doing is closing that gate with the cross fencing, but the animals are still spending way too long in those pastures, which is leading to overgrazing, which is then leading to high disturbance, which then leads to the weed that is the bane of most conventional rancher experiences: the goatweed, the doveweed, the woolly croton. And they, every year they have to go spend money to spray it. Um, so, with respect to your question, now that I've rambled a little bit, I think what I would love to see all land stewards transition to is to recognize that we can't be reductionist in our thinking. We have to be holistic, right? The WHOLE. We need to look at the whole, right? I gave the example of the goatweed, the woolly croton, the doveweed. So many people, so many land stewards spray that duckweed, and then they complain they're not making profit, but then they're spending time, money, and effort, equipment, maintenance, chemicals to spray this duckweed every year. Where if we were to manage the grazing differently, if we would change how we look at things and recognize that we're addressing the symptom rather than the root cause, and if we started focusing more on the root cause, we would be so much more profitable, we would be so much more effective, our productivity would increase, because the bottom line is nature always wins. And the more we work with nature and the more we understand how nature functions and the more we can address the root cause of, and many times that root cause is just pure and simple management. The management that we're applying is not working with nature, it's not allowing nature to allow for these fundamental ecosystem functions. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, and I think it's great that you're talking about, quote unquote conventional farming as being a tool in the toolbox, because I think there's such a vision that doing regenerative farming means never spraying anything ever again. And that industrial revolution has been miraculous in so many ways, but it became sort of the only tool we use, that sort of when all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. And sort of getting out that whole toolbox instead and looking at all the different ways to approach a problem and finding a more balanced and nuanced way to approach and resolve that problem, and looking at different options rather than just, oh, here's a weed, let's spray it, or here's a weed, let's never spray it, and looking at different ways to approach that rather than just one or the other.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Thank you for summarizing that so well. Yes, we have to acknowledge that we have several tools available to us, and just because Granddaddy did it that way doesn't mean we have to do it this way, right? There's so many different options, and many times, that context, we are all unique, right? What I do, what my goals are going to be completely different than Arlene, completely different than Caite's, right? So we have our own unique context, and what works for me isn't going to work for you, either one of you, more than likely. And to our listeners, what I'm doing might not work for them, but what we need to understand is that, first of all, we're in relationship with nature. Second of all, nature needs some stewardship because we do need to produce food. We do need to produce proteins. We need to manage for wildlife. Here in Texas, the biggest issue we have is the population of the wild pigs, the wild boars, is just growing exponentially, and they're very, very destructive. So what is the root cause of this wild boar population? Well, we've limited uh, the hunting of them. Our practices are conducive to allow them to reproduce the way they are. So all of these factors play into the context. So in holistic management, I am a professional certified educator with Holistic Management International. And in holistic management, we talk about having 6 different tools available to us. The first one, and the most important one, is human creativity. The example I like to give, when I bought this place, I put in a water system so that I had risers in each of my pastures, and I have a riser about every 300 feet, so I can place the animals at the right place at the right time for the right reason with the right behavior. And my weakest link is that in my water system is all compression fitting. So I have the female coming out of the ground, and then I have a hose with the male to come in and connect. And as soon as that connects, the water flows in through the hose into the trough. Well, that hose always kinks when it comes out of the ground, and then goes along the top of the ground to the water trough. I was doing a ranch tour, and I had an engineer be part of the ranch tour, and he looked at that, and I shared that was my weakest link. He goes, well, Christine, I know how to solve that. I said, please tell me. He goes, how about putting a 90 off of that riser, off of that male, so that the hose isn't kinked? I'm like, brilliant. It hadn't occurred to me until this man made me aware of it. So human creativity is a very, very important tool. And then we have the tool of fire. People have a healthy fear healthy fear or healthy respect for fire. Fire is a very important tool. My personal opinion with respect to fire, we need to make sure that if we use the tool of fire, then we need to figure out what are we going to do with that bare ground afterwards, because one of the principles of regenerative agriculture is to keep the soil covered. So fire does a fabulous job of jump-starting mineral cycle, but depending on how hot the fire is, it will leave ground bare. Then we have the tool of rest. Those of us that live in a very non-brittle environment that receives a lot of moisture throughout the year, we know that if we don't do anything with that land will become forest very quickly, will become very woody very quickly. when we have less rainfall throughout the year in a more brittle environment, the tool of rest will end up leading towards desertification. So, so we need to make sure we understand our context, which is one of the principles of holistic management is understanding our environment so that we know which tools will degrade or which tools will improve. And then technology. I personally love now that we have these portable solar chargers that I can carry around and electrify all of my polywire in a reel. And now we've got the introduction of those virtual collars. I have colleagues that have started using it because their topography makes it very, very hard to put in step-in posts, to put up the polywire because of the contour changes or the amount of woody species that they have growing. Technology is fabulous, but it can, if it's not used properly, like tillage, then we end up having to mitigate those consequences when we use those tools. Animal impact and grazing is another tool. In holistic management, we strongly advocate that animal impact and grazing is absolutely necessary in very brittle environments, in those environments where we have less rain throughout the year. And then lastly, the last tool is human labor and money. Unfortunately, if we don't use money, typically we use human labor. So that is a tool. We all have our own unique skills. We have our capacities. I'm extremely grateful for the engineer that gave me that insight to fix my weak link on the water hose. So to your point, Caite, understanding that we have all these different tools available and which is the best tool to use given what we're seeing on the land, given what our goal is for our operation, how much profit we want to make, how much time we want to spend on this. A lot. Some people, I'm sure you've talked to many people, especially new to the land, especially when they're homesteading, they have this vision for what they want their land to look like, what they want their life to look like, and they get into everything all at once. And learning curve is very high. It's extremely costly to implement all of these things, infrastructure, equipment, especially when there is very little experience. They might be knowledge because they've learned from YouTube University, but their level of experience is minimal. And many of my customers, many of my clients are people who have moved onto land and took on too much too soon. And they come to me and they're like, Christine, I'm burned out and I'm frustrated, right? Sometimes I think I'm just going to sell up and go back to the city, which is not what we want. We need more people to be on the land, stewarding the land and improving the land because, I think all of us need to eat 3 times a day at least.
Podcasts are free to listen to, but they aren't free to create. Caite and I would appreciate your support as we work to build the Barnyard language community.
Patreon is an easy way for you to make a contribution that goes directly to making the show. As a member of our Patreon community, you get to watch the video version of our weekly updates, complete with questionable hairstyles and clutter. With 3 levels of support, you can choose a tier that works for you.
Keep the podcast going by becoming a patron today at patreon.com/barnyardlanguage.
So, Christine, now that we're 45 minutes into our interview, what is your background in agriculture? How did you end up here?
How did I end up here? So I was born in Argentina. I have always been exposed to land. My grandparents had a pretty sizable ranch in Argentina. When I moved to Brazil, we lived on a couple acres outside of the city, and my father did buy some land where he actually started a banana plantation until he decided that wasn't what he wanted to do, and then he started another company. And I have always been attracted to land. I've always had an agrarian interest bent, so much so that after I got my degree in accounting, I decided that I didn't want to do internal audit, which is what I specialized in. So I went back to school to do my master's in agricultural economics at Michigan State University and had to write a thesis. I used Argentina and the shift of the Argentine agricultural land shifting from cattle to crops because of the advent of glyphosate, aka Roundup. And I was more on the business side of agriculture. I actually, for the first third of my career, I traded ag commodities. I traded corn, soybeans, wheat, soybean oil, soybean meal, and all of these other oilseed products. And I was here in the States. The company I worked for had a headquarters in Switzerland, so I spent some time in Switzerland. And then back in Argentina, trading FOB and CIF markets. So I would sell big vessels to China, India, and Middle East. And then because of social and political issues in Argentina at that time, this was over 25 years ago, I wanted to get up to the States, and I was able to find a job here in Texas with an oil and gas company. And I made the switch to oil and gas. And there I was in logistics and also in marketing our products, which was natural gas. And then I spent many years marketing the production, the crude oil production out of the Permian Basin. But when I moved to Texas, I didn't want to live in suburbia. I wanted to have a little bit of acreage, so I ended up buying 5 acres northwest of Houston, which was within community different distance to the office, and that's what I call my homesteading phase. And that's where we started raising broilers, and I got a dairy cow, and we learned how to make cheese and how to make butter. I bought a halflinger, a draft horse, to work the land. The halflinger was trained in Ohio, so I bought a 2-seater buggy or cart. It was actually a cart, and on the weekends I would harness up the halflinger, and I would give the kids in the neighborhood rides, which was a lot of fun. But the real reason I'm doing what I'm doing now was I realized that many of the symptoms that I was experiencing not soon after I moved to Texas was because of the food I was eating. It turns out I'm allergic to soy, and then developed a intolerance to gluten. I'm not celiac, but I did have a gluten intolerance. And over 24 years ago, it wasn't as available, this clean food and these, let's call it clean. The clean food wasn't as available. So I thought, I've got 5 acres. Surely I can produce my own food. Well, it turns out that it was a lot more difficult than I thought. And for many years, actually for about 8 years, I tried all these things. And I've always been a subscriber to Acres magazine, and I would read an article, go, oh, that's kind of cool. I love that result. So I would try it on my place. And some of these projects were successful. Many of them weren't. And every year I looked at my W-2 that I got from my corporate job and go, where's all this money? And recognizing that money was going into all these projects that I was trying to do. Everything changed when I found an ad to a beginning farmer rancher course that was being offered here in Texas by Holistic Management International. And it was a 6-month program where we learned the holistic management framework. But more importantly, we were being hosted by people that were implementing holistic management, so we could see in action what all this meant. And even before I graduated from that class, I knew that I wanted to share this framework and this holistic mindset to more land stewards. And I came home and implemented these concepts and mindset and knowledge and tools, then I started training to become an educator. It's a 3-year, pretty intense program. And so now I teach it to others. So that's my long answer to your quick question.
Yeah, well, I mean, a person's life story, especially when it's connected to agriculture, is never going to be a short one. So, when or at what point did you make the jump from a few acres outside of Houston to where you are now, and what decisions led to that move?
Oh, good question. That is, that adds to the story. So I was a single parent when I bought the 5 acres, and then I met a gentleman who is American but was raised in Africa. He was a missionary. His parents were missionaries to Tanzania, and we met on farmersonly.com.
I actually met my husband on farmersonly.com as well. You're the first person I've talked to on this show who has.
Did you really? Oh, that's awesome.
Yes. Farmersonly.com, you should be sponsoring us.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I met him. And actually, the funny story was that, and I was talking to another gentleman, and the, the this man from Africa kept messaging me, and I was ignoring him because I was enjoying the conversation with this other man. Well, it didn't work out, so I'm like, okay, I'll give this African a chance. Anyway, we met, and we had so much in common. Most especially the fact that we both lived in third world, and once you've been exposed to that culture, your worldview becomes a lot broader, and so he understood some of the behaviors and the mindsets that we develop when we live in third world. Anyway, we got married and we moved on to his family land. So I moved on to 23 acres, and then we purchased family members' land that was right next door. So we ended up with 46 acres. For several reasons, we did end up divorcing, not because of Farmers Only, but because of other issues. And so that's when I moved from those 46 acres to the 100 acres I have now.
Right. So you talked before about the concept of balance, which is elusive, I think, for everyone. But I think especially for people involved in agriculture, when you're talking about raising a family, potentially having paying jobs that are not connected to ag, and then also trying to run farms or ranches. When you're looking at the process of helping people find balance in terms of working the land, but also have balance in terms of family life and finances and all those kinds of things, where do you start, and what are some of the key components to that?
Oh, I love this question, Arlene. The first place I start, which people don't appreciate until after the fact, so it's I have to do a really good job convincing how important this is, but it's starting what we call a holistic goal. I've already shared that what works for me is not going to work for either one of you because we're all unique. And then when you enter into partnership with a spouse, or you have other generations involved in the farm, in the operation, we need to get everybody on the same page. But while getting everybody on the same page, we also need to honor that each of these individuals have their unique values, what's important to them, what drives them, what is their passion, and finding that common ground and finding those values that are important. Many of us, we move onto land because family is important to us, and those of us that have generational succession, that it, creating an environment where we're welcoming that next generation or even the third generation back onto the land is really important. So starting with the holistic goal, which is a 3-part statement saying, this is what we value and this is what we want our life to look like. And then those behaviors and systems we need to have in place in order to have that quality of life that we want. When you're farming, harvesting season is very, a very important aspect. We might have to forego having our day of rest if a day of rest is important, but recognizing that this is just a one-time period, or it could be planting season and harvesting season when you're cropping, right? When you're ranching, when you're having livestock, it could be a little bit more flexible. But recognizing what is important to us and making sure everybody is on the same page, but most especially that communication is happening, that the human component of these operations, right? That we feel comfortable sharing those struggles. If we're stressed financially, then let's recognize we're stressed financially, and let's all get on the same page to discuss where is the leak, the financial leak happening. Our sales not what expected, and to have a component of saying, okay, things aren't working, let's get together, let's discuss it. What is everybody's opinion about what needs to be done? And have some sort of communication plan so that we can address these issues and they don't fester and they don't become don't become the elephant in the room where nobody addresses it. And it all boils down to, we need to make sure that we recognize our impact in the operation and what we can and can't be doing in order to promote the growth, the health, the productivity of the entire operation. And that works with, in holistic management, we have the decision testing questions. It's a set of 7 questions. That the first question is, are we addressing the root cause? So many times when we meet together with the other members, the other decision makers in the operation, first of all, we don't have that common ground. We don't have that statement of purpose. We don't have that holistic goal saying, this is what we're working towards. This is ultimately what we want to provide for the next generation. And those decision testing questions make sure that we honor that holistic goal, that statement of purpose, but also that we recognize that we need to address that root cause. We need to address the weak link in any enterprise. We need to recognize that vision that we're working towards. I find, and I'm at fault of this, so many times when we have a problem, we're addressing for the problem today. I need to solve this today because it's causing today, not recognizing that the potential consequence of that decision today in year 2, year 3, year 5, year 10, because we tend to be very short-sighted when it comes to problems. Did I answer your question well enough?
Yeah, I really like that. And I think that's an important point because sometimes the solution leads us on a path that maybe we didn't even want to be on, but it may have fixed that immediate problem. You're right. But then you've got that, well, we made that decision. And so that leads us to the next, obvious thing. And it can take you off the path that you actually intended to be on in what seemed like just a problem solving move.
Yeah. And communication is super important. I have the benefit that because I'm running this place by myself, I can do whatever I want. But then I'm also very hard on myself.
Right. Easy to communicate with yourself.
Well, actually, you know what? It's not. I have learned more about who Christine is in the last 5 years that I've been a full-time land steward than the previous 40 years that I was in this world. There's nothing like being in nature and doing this by yourself to recognize, this isn't working because I'm not doing what I need to be doing. So that self-analysis is critical to this, but and recognizing and then communicating about it, right? I did offer a masterclass earlier last week, and we talked about how the human is so important because the human is the one making the decision. But if the human has a blind spot, if the human has a conditioned tendency, if the human is under stress, right? The creativity, because when we're stressed, we're in fight or flight mode. That creativity and the open-mindedness just isn't there. And so some of these decisions that we're making are not considering the whole, the WHOLE, because we haven't addressed it. Okay, I'm stressed. Let me go de-stress and then come back and let's resolve this.
So, Christine, can you tell our listeners about some of the programs you offer and about your podcast?
Sure. So I do have a podcast. Started it last October, so I guess I'm close to my anniversary. The title of the podcast is Regenerative Agriculture: Thriving as a Modern Rancher, and I invite others who are managing holistically to share their experience. And when I don't have a guest, I have solo episodes where I'm providing educational material, and uh, I'm excited for a couple interviews that I've got that still have to be edited that will be coming up. I also offer a, a group mentorship for anybody interested in implementing holistic management and the framework into their operation. It's the group mentorship is called Thriving Land Steward, and basically I hold people's hands through the entire process from writing their holistic goal, and generally there's partnerships, and I act as mediator and help them find that common ground through to let's plan infrastructure investments on the land. Let's plan the cropping if they're farmers. Let's plan grazing. Let's do a financial management, financial planning so that we have the cash flow we need, so we're making the profit we need. And then even to marketing, to, if we're raising a good product, how do we market that product? How do we price that product? I also spend quite a bit of time helping each of my mentees with their own personal struggles. So that is the group mentorship program called Thriving Land Stewards. And I've just launched a group mentorship for women in regenerative agriculture that is being collaborated with Lauren Lovejoy at Regenerative Farmers of America. And that the first membership cohort will start in October. And basically, it's the membership like you would a gym, where you will be provided an educational video with some worksheets to support that. And then we will meet as a group, as a cohort, and just discuss the material and share. The goal of this is to build community, a supportive community for the women that are implementing regenerative agriculture. Some of us are doing this by ourselves, and so having somebody we can call, having somebody to say, I want to quit, nothing's working, and have somebody understand and support you through it, as well as providing some educational component, because as we work with nature, we understand how complex it is to manage nature, finances, and our quality of life. And that will be starting. Applications are open through October 3rd. But after the first cohort, we are opening it up to people, so you can sign up at any time.
That is a lot of different things. Thank you for describing some of them to us. I think we're going to pivot now into some of the parenting side of our podcast, because we're both an ag and a parenting podcast. So one of the ways that we often get into this discussion is talking to people about that transition, the time when they became a parent for the first time, because it brings up a lot of feelings for people and often leads to some big life changes. So when you reflect on the time that you first became a parent, what comes up for you?
When I had my daughter, who is now 36, I very quickly became a single parent, because I don't know how to pick men, is the bottom line. So became a single parent very quickly. And I had already moved to the States. I had graduated. It did take me a while to complete my master's, and part of the reason for completing my master's was my stepfather, who is American. My parents divorced, and my mother remarried to an American, and so that was why I was able to go up to Michigan for school. He was an executive with an automotive company, and he's like, okay, he sat me down. He goes, okay, now you're a single parent. Now you need to figure out how you're going to support this child and be able to provide housing and education and all these things. And so we discussed it, and he strongly advocated that I go complete my master's, which I did. So as a toddler, I was working full time, and I was going to school at night and then doing homework, and it was very stressful, but in hindsight, it made me grow up so quickly. There's nothing like becoming a parent to grow up very quickly. And because of the advice I was given, I've chased a corporate career, because my thought was, I'm a single parent. I need to provide for my child. I need to be able to pay for college. So when I was given opportunities to take promotions, and some of these promotions involved moving countries or moving cities, I had no problem. I'm like, okay, let's go. One of the big aha moments when I learned about the holistic management decision testing questions was recognizing that when we make a decision and we think we're making the right decision because it means more money, we don't qualify or quantify what is going to impact to our quality of life. So I did very well in my corporate career, but my corporate career did include trips. It did include dinners. It did include boondoggles. And so my child was raised by a nanny, because I had to be gone. And my mother, bless her, she was being very supportive, and she kept telling me, Christine, it's not quantity, it's quality. In hindsight, I know better, but this what allowed me. So when we moved to Texas for the job, again, I was moving because I needed to change country. It was also a great opportunity, a salary increase, and I bought the 5 acres. My daughter actually asked me, she goes, Mom, can we stay here more than 2 years? And my heart just broke. I'm like, what have I done to her? So buying the 5 acres was another way to keep me still. It's a lot easier to sell a house in suburbia than it is to sell 5 acres out in the middle of the country. And I think I've honored her, because I've been in Texas 25 years. She has since left Texas, but that it's her life, and she's allowed to do it. So when I bought the 5 acres and I started living my agrarian dream, started homesteading, the kids were included in everything. So much so that next door to me was a family that were homeschooling, and they had 10 children. And so it became this little compound of all these 10 kids, plus by that time I had 2 children. And children were just involved in everything. They helped with chores, they helped with chicken processing, they helped with milking. Actually, my daughter became quite possessive of the cow when it was milk time, because when I wanted to milk, because I wanted to milk, and she's like, but Mom, you take so slow, and my hands are stronger, and I'll just do it. So it was actually a bit of a challenge to even have access to this cow. I think we do our children a disservice by not giving them chores, by not exposing the life cycle of birth and growth and death, which we see so evident in nature. I think many of the issues that we have in our current in the young generation is that they are so disassociated with nature and they don't see reality for what it is. But that's just my personal opinion.
So how old was she when you first started the homesteading part of your life, when you made that move to Texas?
She was 9. She was 9 years old.
And you were still a single parent at that point.
I was still a single parent. So what I forgot to mention was this homeschooling family did have 10 children, and they became very, very good friends of mine. And because they had 10 children, they were actually living this homestead life. So I learned a lot from Mrs. Franklin. Megan Megan would go to this family's home and pick up the bus from there because I had to commute into town. But she would go to the neighbor's house and pick up the bus there, and then she would come back and get dropped off at the neighbor's house. So she had an embedded play system already in place because there were several girls her age in that family. When my daughter was in 6th grade, she was having a hard time with her studies. She was having a hard time with some bullying in the school, and I mentioned to Mrs. Franklin that my concerns, and she very kindly and generously offered to allow Megan to be homeschooled while she was spent the day at the Franklin household. And this was before I really understood homeschooling. And my first question was, well, how am I going to keep her busy for 8 hours? And she's like, she doesn't need to be studying for 8 hours. That's just the school system, right? She can have 2 or 3 hours worth of schoolwork, and then the rest of the time there's activities. And so it just opened my mind. That's when I first started learning how to teach, was when I had to homeschool my daughter and learning different learning styles, and she struggled with math, poor thing. She still struggles with math, and trying to help her understand math and the advantages of homeschooling as we have it now is there's so much variety in curriculum, and we eventually found a curriculum that it clicked for her. So I was very thankful. But yeah, I couldn't have done it without the Franklin family, to be honest. And I think that's where America and the individuality of Americans, is what made this country great. But the reality is we need community, we need support, we need to live in community so that when we need help or when we can offer help, that's possible.
Absolutely, yeah. I was going to ask how you managed being a single parent with farm life, but it sounds like it wasn't. You might have been a single parent, but you weren't doing it on your own. So that is what makes all the difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, I wasn't.
What has been your favorite thing about raising children with a connection to agriculture and on the homestead or the ranch?
They value work. It allows them to grow so much confidence, right? When you start with chicks and then you feed them and water them every day, and then when it comes close to processing, you gather them and you take them to the processor, and then you come back and you eat it and you taste it and it tastes so good. Or if it's an enterprise and you're selling to friends, family, neighbors, whoever, it's such a joy as a parent to see them, their chests just grow and confidence and said, I did this, right? Look at me, look at what I did. I think that connection with nature makes them more grounded. My daughter did have the benefit that she lived in third world countries. We lived a number of years in Argentina, so she had that exposure to the third world countries. I remember we were in a town in southern Argentina, off on the coast, when I was working for a sunflower processing company, and at night we would walk around the downtown, and there would be children begging for food or for money. And I was exposed to this all my life, so I have become pretty hardened. And my daughter was with me, and there was two young kids. I mean, they can't have been more than 5 or 6 on the street begging for money. And I just walked past them, and my daughter pulled my hand. She goes, "Mom, aren't we going to help them?" And, uh, and she her heart, it was in the right place. And I explained to her that uh, many times these children are begging for money to then give to their parents, for the parents then to go buy alcohol or whatever. And I've been exposed to this, so I knew this. And I pointed out the parents that were sitting at a bar, and they were watching the kids, so I knew they were related. I said, see that couple over there? I said, yeah. I said, these kids are begging for money so that this couple can do things that aren't really going to benefit the kids. Unfortunately, that was a reality check for her. She was 7 at that time. Whether I did right or wrong, I still debate. But that third world experience, together with being in nature and understanding this life cycle of birth and death, and that everything that lives dies at some point, is so important.
So, Christine, what were some of your biggest parenting struggles through the years?
Teenage years. The teenage years. My daughter didn't actually do the terrible teenage years until she hit 19. And because here in the States she was labeled as an adult, uh, my biggest parenting struggle was recognizing that I had to let go. I had to let her live her life. That I wasn't, I couldn't control her like I did when she was younger. Letting go was the hardest thing I had to do, to allow her to make her choices and to watch her suffer the consequences of her choices.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's not like the toddler stuff, although it seems really important at the time, when you're in it. But yeah, the big stuff is the hard stuff.
Yeah. I have to say she was very good. We had a very close relationship. She's my daughter is very easygoing, and so I really didn't have the terrible twos. I really didn't have the terrible teenage years as a young girl. I'd like to tease her now. We have a very close relationship now. I like to tease her that she saved everything for when she turned 19, and then everything came out. But by then I didn't have I didn't have the control that I did when she when she would have been a toddler or a teenager.
Right, yeah, when she's still in your house. So what, other than learning to let go, what is a piece of parenting advice that you would want to share with another parent that you've learned along the way?
This is a reflection of my mothering skills and my maturity, but I made some pretty poor decisions, and with those pretty poor decisions, there's consequences. And I chose to be very honest about those decisions and those consequences. And my thought was, if I share this with my children won't do the same thing. But just because you tell them and just because they're living the consequences doesn't mean that they don't do the same. I've watched my daughter do the same thing I did, which made it even harder, right? To watch this, like, I told you not to do this. You suffered the consequences of me doing the same. Why are you repeating the cycle? So, in hindsight, now she's 36, has 2 children of her own. after she did her teenage angst in her early teen, in her adult teens. Actually, I can't say that. That's not true. 19, 20, and 21. She and I both spent a lot of time healing ourselves in therapy, and as a 60-year-old now, in order to be an effective parent, we must have our own issues resolved. If not resolved, at least aware of them and working on it, because I could be a much more effective parent today than I was in my 20s. I was so ill prepared to be a parent then. Trauma, emotional maturity, parental wisdom. Oh, I tell my daughter it's a miracle she survived.
This parenting thing is such a beautiful and strange place to be, right? I mean, it reveals more about yourself. You think you're raising someone else, but you're actually figuring out how to raise yourself too at the same time. So, yeah.
Exactly. No, it's how true. Now, I will say, because I have continued healing and continued addressing trauma and all of these things and the conditioned tendencies that we develop because of circumstances. I have come to learn about human design. I'm a Christian. I believe in Christ, but I also believe that a lot of God's knowledge was shared with others. And human design brings in um, quantum physics, it brings in astrology, it brings in the Chinese I Ching and some other, and the Buddhist chakras, to determine, based on your date of birth, your time of birth, and your location of birth, your actual design. And at first, when I heard all this, I thought it was really, really woo woo. I'm like, right. But I, I'm curious by nature, so I started diving into it. And the more I've learned about human design, the more I learn about myself. And what has been really interesting and such a eye opener is I ran the charts of my children, and it said right there what I needed to be doing with my children. We think very simplistically that, we've got the father, we've got the mother, so certainly we're going to create, a child that is going to be similar to us. And so what works for us is going to work for our children. But the reality is that because of all these other factors, astrology, whatever, we're all very, very, very unique. And um, so when my two grandchildren were born, I ran their charts and I sat down with my daughter and I said, okay, this is your two sons. This is what he's going to like. This is the type of environment he's going to like. This is how he's going to learn, and all of these things. And it says it all right there. So and I don't want to brag because we shouldn't, but my daughter is a much better parent because she understands her two children. Genetics are the same, but because of external factors, they're completely different human beings. And what works for one child doesn't work for the other child, and we need to recognize that. Which just goes back to nature is complex, as are children, as are humans, as are adults. And when we understand that they're unique and special, then we need to manage, parent, lead, coach, teach completely differently because of their uniqueness.
That's all the stuff. Same with farms, same with ranches, right? We just need to, we're all doing it differently, but doing our best, right? Katie, do you want to end the main part of the podcast with our usual question?
Yep. So, Christine, we ask all of our guests, if you were going to dominate a category at the county fair, what would it be? And categories can be real or made up to ensure that you win.
Okay, here's a made up one. How many languages can you use in one sentence?
Oh, do you have a sample sentence for us, or you just know that you could put one together?
I share that because growing up, when we moved from in Argentina, where I was born, I only spoke Spanish. But when we moved this to Brazil, my mother said, "Okay, now we need to learn how to speak Portuguese, and you also need to learn how to speak English." And so at home, we always spoke this mixture of English, Spanish, Portuguese. And then I found myself, when I spent some time in Geneva at home, I would bring in some French words. There's some words that are just so good in a different language, and it became this a Martin language that was just this hodgepodge of stuff. And funnily enough, with my now ex-husband, who was raised in Africa, they did the same thing in their language. When they spoke, they would throw in words from Swahili or some of the other local languages, whichever was the best representation, interpretation of a feeling or object. So yeah. Um,
I really like that, yeah, because you pick up those things every now and then, where in another language, it's like to describe this thing, and it's 4 or 5 words, and it's like, well, that is a recurring thing. Why don't we have a word for that in English? So I love the ability to pick the best of the ones that and be able to use whichever adequately describes what you're going through. So we will move into our cussing and discussing, which is the way we wrap up each of our episodes. If you are a listener and want to submit yours on our SpeakPipe or by email, you can go to speakpipe.com/barnyard language and leave a voice memo, or send us an email at barnyardlanguage@gmail.com. Katie, what are you going to cuss and or discuss this week?
So, my daughter must have some sort of magical drawing power for lice. I don't know how. Every year, she's gotten lice within like the first month, 2 months of school, including this year. And having all this time to fight with her and having all this time to comb her hair, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about hair. And beyond the cultural, racial implications of people, getting fired for having what other people have considered inappropriate hair due to racist things or whatever, the cultural implications of hair, the fact that we spend this much time and money either trying to make more of it grow out of our heads or less of it grow out of the entire rest of our body.
And have it be the right color, the right texture, the right whatever you want for the event that you're going to.
Yes. And then if your hair's a particular shape or length, you need to get it cut an ungodly frequency. And then, if God forbid you're a livestock farmer who is especially showing animals, you're getting them fitted or you're shearing them or whatever. So that's just more hair. And if you have pets, like, I don't know, a yellow lab and an Aussie who are both blowing their coats, it's just more hair.
I think there's a Dr. Seuss book about this, isn't there?
There's a whole musical about it, yeah. Just the amount of time and money that I spend on hair is horrifying. And we're not even like fancy hair people. I mean, y'all have seen my hair.
Right. It's not like you're a super high maintenance hair family.
Yeah, we're very low maintenance, and it's still nuts. And it's just really gross to think about because too, it's just like keratin growing out of your skin,
Yeah, yeah. If you think about it too much, it's like, oh, I don't even want to really think about what it is that hair is made up of. Yep.
and it's just everywhere. Also, if anyone has any tips, we have a long-haired cat who leaves these like weirdly embedded little balls of fur on every textile in our home. Christine, what do you have to cuss and discuss today?
Internet. Actually, no, that's not true. because of my multi-species and my poultry, I have livestock guardian dogs. And one livestock guardian dog who was actually born during our snowmageddon back in 2021 in February, where we had snow on the ground for 10 days, of which 9 of them we didn't have power anyway. This one particular livestock guardian dog has bonded to me, which I'm happy for, because his siblings, I had 2 other siblings of his, and they never came home because my rancher friends don't understand livestock guardian dogs. But if any of you know livestock guardian dogs, when it gets really hot, they like to dig, and especially around buildings to try and stay cool. And I have in the office in the building that I'm recording this with you is my office slash studio, podcast studio. He likes to come and sit with me in the studio, but outside. And he has decided that his most preferred spot to dig is where the cable for my internet is come through into the building. And of course, this weekend he broke the connection. So not only do I have this huge pit now, I now have to wait for the internet provider to. Of course, you call them and they're like, "Oh, we're 4 weeks out."
Yes, yeah. We were having some internet issues recently. That is going to be my cousin discuss, so I'll lead right into it. Is the calling to a call center to try and tell them what your issue is when they think they already know what the issue is, but then you cannot convince them that it's not. Because I had I need to talk to your manager several times because I kept calling in and getting these very earnest and very, people trying to do their jobs and trying to be helpful who were telling me that there was a local outage. And I kept telling them, no, it's just my house. I've already talked to my neighbors. I live on a dead end road. I know it's just me. So please don't tell me that it's an outage that is going to eventually get fixed, because believe me, it's not. It's just my house. And eventually someone came here and they agreed with me, but it took a long time to actually convince the people on the other end of the phone that that was the reality.
I'll ditto that too.
I feel like this is an anti-cuss, Arlene, but these moments make me so glad for our local cooperative utilities. Because, yeah, things like when I had to call our power co-op to tell them that our power was out, and I was able to just explain to them that my father-in-law had hit the power line with a dump head, and I knew
So you knew the source.
exactly what the problem was. It was very handy.
So we want to thank you so much, Christine, for joining us on the podcast today. If you want to connect with Christine, you can go to thrivinglandsteward.com or on Instagram or Facebook. Find her at Thriving Land Steward. Thank you so much, Christine, for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for joining us on Barnyard Language. If you enjoy the show, please support us on Patreon with a donation.
Big thanks go out to our show editor, Krista Paffrath at the Rural Podcast Network.
Please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen, and follow the show so you never miss an episode.
If you want to connect with other farming families, join the private Barnyard Language Facebook group.
We are always in search of future guests for the podcast. If you or someone you know would like to chat with us, get in touch.